That's the dream, isn't it? Almost 600 twin-turbocharged horsepower coursing through an all-wheel drive chassis that seems to bend physics to its will. The Nissan GT-R, like its Skyline-branded predecessors, is a dream car for many people. But in 2003, 5 years before the rebirth of the iconic GT-R badge, Nissan brought to the world something a little more attainable. Today, I think it might be time for that car to come out of the shadow of Big Brother. Hello everyone, let me tell you a story about a man named Dan. Dan is the latest addition to the JayEmm on Cars team. Laurie and I met him this summer on one of the events that we run, in cheap cars going up to the Isle of Skye. Now, Dan and his group of friends have very similar interests to Laurie and myself. We all love cars and we all appreciate the fun that can be had in something budget orientated. And we all live in the same area, so we've kind of kept in contact since. Now, Dan's very tech orientated and he's been helping out on the channel as and when he can. He's filmed a few videos for me recently, taking Laurie's place when he's not available behind the camera, and maybe soon he'll appear in front of it as well, but you know, we got to train him up first. The first video that Dan helped me with was the introduction video to my 996. Now, he really liked that car, but he doesn't really have much experience of sports cars. So after we'd finished filming, as it was a lovely day, I said to him as a thank you, why don't you take the car out for a drive? Have a go. You've never driven a Porsche before, you've never driven a sports car before. Have a go. So he did. And then a couple of weeks later, his 1.6 Golf went up for sale. And then about a month later, this appeared on his driveway. This is a 2006 Nissan 350z GT. And given the way that the car market has been for the last few years and continues to be, this, in my opinion, is one of the few true bargain sports cars still out there. Now, most of you will probably be familiar with the basic ingredients of this car, but before we take it out, I'm just going to give you a quick recap. Under here, you have a 3.5 litre engine producing just shy of 300 horsepower. Now, the 350Z is slightly confusing because they had essentially 3 different engines. You had the first version of this engine, the second version, which this is, which has a little bit more power, but also a little bit less torque. And then you had the HR version of the engine, which was a fairly thorough redesign, HR meaning high revving. So it went to 7,500 RPM rather than the 7,000 that this does, and had a little bit more power again. Then the model, of course, was replaced with the 3.7 litre 370Z. On the inside, it is a strict 2-seater coupe with a boot that's not quite as big as you think it should be. That's a V6 up front with a manual gearbox in the middle, driving the rear wheels only. It is, on paper, the perfect recipe for a sports car. However, detractors will also be keen to point out the fact that in the muscle car of old tradition, this car is also built on a chassis that is shared with a saloon car. There's Skyline 37 or 35, whatever, I don't really know, and I'm not really that bothered, because what bothers me is how it actually performs. So, it's a kind of grim, messy day out here. Not really the day for top-down motoring, which is fortunate because this is the coupe version of the car, not the convertible, which was also available. So let's just get out there and see what happens before it rains. Now, although I may place a heavy emphasis on what cars I like to drive, for me, that's not actually the first thing one considers when looking at a sports car. You see, driving a sports car in the buying process is actually one of the last things that you do. Nobody just goes out and drives a car and suddenly decides they like it unless they've had someone basically bend their ear and force them into doing so. For most people, the normal order of things is that they see a car. that they really, really like the look of, or perhaps they have a set of criteria. You know, here's my budget, I want a rear-wheel drive sports car, what can I get for my money? And they'll look and search and see, okay, what's available? And then you've got to see the car and you go, actually, yeah, that works for me, or maybe it doesn't. The next thing, of course, in the 21st century is hearing the car, because if you're anything like me, and you probably are, because you're currently watching a car video on YouTube, and you like watching car videos on YouTube, then you're going to start researching said car. And hopefully, if the YouTube has done a very good job of things, they're going to give you some lovely sound clips, like this. And then you're going to go, oh yeah, that seems like the kind of car for me. So only at that stage, when you realise that this is something that you really want, are you going to go and drive one. I'm not an expert in these cars because they've never really appealed to me all that much. And that goes back to my first point, because the looks just don't quite grab me like they possibly should. The car's sort of a bit big and brutish and so on, but unlike the GTR, which has definitely grown on me as the years have progressed, this hasn't. Behind the wheel, it's got a lot going for it. First things first, it actually sounds quite nice. It's easy to forget, but this model was introduced a decade and a half ago. It's, in car terms, pretty damn old. But it came at a very interesting period in car manufacturing, when we were really sat on that cusp between old school 80s and 90s mechanical cars and the modern tech fest that cars have since become. Which means you have things like that naturally aspirated 3.5 litre V6 and a manual 6-speed gearbox, hydraulic steering, which is just really, really pleasant to use and has a great weighting and feel to it. But you also have a sat-nav, a Bose sound system. These are part of the GT pack. That sound system probably dates the car more than anything else, because not only do you have a CD player, you also have a cassette. Dolby B though, not bad. Further enhancing this car's proper sports car credentials is a pretty decent set of gauges. I don't like cars which don't have proper gauges. Now, you've got your tacho, bang center, that's where they should be in a sports car. You've got your fuel gauge, which you need to keep an eye on. You've got your temperature gauge here, which is for water rather than oil. Speedo on the right. Little gauges down here for your odo and your trip counter. Over here you've got one screen, which is currently showing my speed in digital format, but I believe can show various different things. Oil pressure. Remember the last time a sports car had one of those in? Not many people put that in there now. And you got your battery gauge, which I've always found to be a little bit useless, but anyway, it's there and it's nice. The car feels very, very solid, very, very approachable, very reliable. Like, I know exactly what it's going to do, even though the conditions out there aren't great. Now, I'm not going to be playing with it too much for a couple of reasons. Number one, the rear tyres are very old and will be getting replaced fairly soon. At the same time, the wheels on this car are getting resprayed. One of the reasons that I've rushed, essentially, to get this car on the channel is because Dan is soon going to be modifying it. Now, for reasons known only to him, he decided to spend a long time trying to find a standard, unmodified example of one of these so that he could modify it. His logic, I believe, is the fact that because it was standard, it therefore won't have been mucked around with. So you're going to see this car on the channel hopefully a few times over the coming year or two, as Dan basically changes some of the visuals. We're going to put an exhaust on it, do various things. He's also going to start track driving, which he's never done before, and we're going to introduce him into that exciting world. So If you're part of a Z owners group or anything like that, you got some advice or maybe some cool spare bits that Dan can have, please message me and I'll forward your details on to him, because we'd really, really appreciate it. This car is going to be appearing on the channel again. Another thing that's a real highlight about this car is this gear shift. Now, this is the second time that I've driven this car. The first time was really, really briefly, like a 2-mile trip. The one thing I'm still getting used to is the fact that this seems to have like a super, super lightweight flywheel. It revs up so easily. Here, watch this, just down, and it's just there. So for heel and toe, it's absolutely awesome. Now, the 370 has auto rev matching for when you downshift. This, so far as I can tell, does not. There's a few things on the interior which do cheapen the car a little bit, and it, you know, does feel somewhat like 90s Jap car rather than a noughties Jap car, but you know, that's fine, because Dan, his friends, and to some extent me, we are kind of into those types of cars. And the fact of the matter is that when you can pick one of these up for a pretty bargain price, it doesn't really matter. They weren't expensive when they were new either, and that means you're going to be able to forgive quite a bit. The main thing is that it feels very, very well made, very solid, very reassuring, and it does pretty much drive like a sports car. And when you're buying your first sports car, you want to consider things like, is it going to be safe and easy to drive? You know, if your experience to date is only of low or modestly powered front-wheel drive hatchbacks or possibly all-wheel drive cars, you're going to want a car that you can play with, you can experiment with. One other downside of the way that this car is shaped, and you'll find this to be a common theme with cars that were generally available in both coupe and convertible form, is that the rear three-quarter visibility is atrocious. It's exactly the same as it was in my Z4M coupe, pretty much the same as you get in an F-Type, same as you get in, say, an Audi TT when the roof is up in the convertible version. It's not good. This is one area where my 911 is certainly a much better car. If you're using its daily stuff, if you're in traffic or whatever, that all-round visibility of the 911 is kind of hard to beat. This, of course, also is a strict two-seater, not a 2+2. Now, this is probably as good a time as any to mention my 911. Now, I've been doing a fair amount of videos and things on that car recently. If you haven't seen those, I've recently acquired a 2004 996 Carrera 4S. Now, in theory, that's a very different car to this because it costs about 4 times as much. However, on paper, it's actually pretty damn similar. They're both producing 300-something horsepower. They both weigh 1,500-ish kilos. They come from a similar time period. There's a 2-year difference between the registration dates of the two cars. They're both 6-speed manuals, so I'm not yet decided whether I want to do a comparison video between the two. But if you'd like to see that, please let me know in the comments. And if enough people want to see that video, I am absolutely happy to make it. Now, what we're going to give you as we're approaching a national speed limit is a bit of a third gear pull so you can see what the car sounds like stock. And this is also going to be very valuable and important to have as a clip, because when we change the exhaust, we want to see just what we've done to it. If any of you have ideas for what kind of exhaust we should put on the car, let us know. We don't want anything too shouty, just something a little bit more vocal. Sounds very, very good for a car with absolutely no modifications whatsoever. Standard airbox, standard exhaust. Now, the airbox is also on our mods list because we've been told that these do respond very well to intake mods. So any 350Z experts that are watching this, that have got suggestions on that front, again, please do comment down below. Now, if you're watching this video because this is a car that you're potentially shopping for, should you buy? And what else should you be considering? Well, the other things that Dan considered were things like the BMW Z4, but those are still fairly strong money, and the 3-litre version of the car just doesn't have the same sort of firepower that this does. The M, meanwhile, is an awful lot more money. You could get an early Boxster. It's a very, very different type of car, but again, it's quite a bit more money, and it's actually quite slow until you get to the much, much later cars, which again are even more. You're going to find the entry-level Boxsters, particularly the 2.5s, 2.7s, are just... they aren't good. I mean, they're lovely cars, but quick, they are not. They also have this cloud of unreliability hanging over them. When Dan and I were looking at these, we did a little bit of research online to see what the common faults are. You know, when you're looking to pick up a car, what should you look for? And honestly, we couldn't seem to find that much that really went wrong with them. I mean, perhaps there are problems out there for them. Of course, every car will have its niggles and issues, but in terms of major faults and failings, this doesn't really seem to have any. And of course, if you're the sort of person that is into modifying your cars, these are a relatively popular car, so there is a good amount of support out there, a good number of aftermarket bits, but it's still something a little bit different. If you're a younger petrolhead and you want to buy your first fun, exciting car, but you're of the mindset that a Golf R is just a bit dull, a bit boring, these do make a great alternative. And perhaps your budget is a little bit more generous, in which case you should probably be looking at something like a 350Z or even a 350Z Nismo, which is a very cool car. I actually like the looks of the previous 350Z Nismo. I'm not a fan of the new design they've gone for with the small little spoiler. I like the big, chunky, meaty one. A Nismo spoiler is also one of the planned additions to this car, so of course it's going to look a little bit more aggressive. The decals on the side are going to go. The theme for this car is going to be blue and white. The exact colour is called Azure Blue, and I'm a real big fan of it. Now, what else would you be looking at in this price category? Well, you could pick yourself up a Scirocco, and that's what Dan was looking at, but the truth of it is that a Scirocco is simply a Golf in a nice little dress, and he already had a Golf. He'd just be losing a bit of practicality and getting something not all that special. And when I mentioned these, I'm not sure he'd really heard of them, perhaps forgotten about them. He started looking at them. That was it. You had to have a 350, and it had to be blue. And in fairness, having driven it now, is it the perfect first sports car? Maybe not. But can I think of a better one right now? No. I mean, it drinks. It really drinks. We put a lot of fuel in it when we picked it up. A lot. It's about a 70-litre tank. It's quite scary how much fuel you can put in this. And if you're used to a diesel Golf, then it's going to scare the bejesus out of you. But if you're just buying it as a special occasions car, or you don't really do that many miles, then that's not really a worry. And petrol prices in this country are falling. You should run this on super unleaded as well, because apparently it does not enjoy the regular stuff. But, you know, that's part of the experience. If you want a sports car, I think you should just get a sports car and just go the whole hog. And if someone gave me $5 or $6 grand to spend on a sports car, yeah, it's epic. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I've certainly enjoyed driving this car. Oh, she revs nicely. And I know Dan's loving it too. So, please comment below if you haven't already. We've given you a lot of questions in the video to respond to. Hit the like button if you haven't already as well. And please subscribe if you're not currently a subscriber. Apparently only about 15% of people watching these videos are subscribers, and that subscriber count number means a huge amount when it comes to getting cars from various places for review. So you hit that button and that helps me get you guys some more cool content. So thanks again for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.